Tonight, we will journey across windswept deserts and through the cool mountain passes of Central Asia, following a network of routes that connected distant civilizations for more than 1,500 years. As night falls over the ancient city of Samarkand, where turquoise-tiled domes catch the last amber light, we will trace the paths worn smooth by countless caravans, discovering how trade shaped landscapes, cities, and the very rhythm of life along the Silk Road. What secrets lie buried beneath the shifting sands of the Taklamakan Desert, and what sustained travelers through months of arduous passage across some of Earth's most unforgiving terrain? We will let these questions unfold gently, following the thread of history wherever it leads, beneath vast starlit skies that have witnessed millennia of human perseverance. The Silk Road was never a single road. It was, instead, a vast network of land and sea paths stretching across more than 6,400 kilometers, connecting the ancient city of Xi'an in eastern China to the Mediterranean Sea. From the 2nd century before the Common Era until the mid-15th century, these routes facilitated not merely the exchange of silk, spices, and precious stones, but also the movement of religions, technologies, languages, and ideas. The very term, Silk Road, reflects only one commodity among thousands, yet silk's luxurious shimmer and China's closely guarded monopoly on its production made it synonymous with the entire network of exchange that defined an era. The landscape through which these routes passed varied dramatically. Travelers departing from Xi'an would follow the Great Wall of China northwest into the Hexi Corridor, a narrow passage between mountain ranges that funneled caravans towards Central Asia. Beyond this corridor lay the Taklamakan Desert, whose very name translates from the Uyghur language as Place of Ruins or Sea of Death, a waterless expanse where summer surface temperatures could reach 70 to 80 degrees Celsius and winter lows plummeted below minus 20 degrees Celsius. The desert's hypercontinental climate meant precipitation rarely exceeded 100 millimeters annually, with some eastern regions receiving as little as 4 to 5 millimeters, while evaporation rates soared to 3,400 millimeters per year. Yet caravans did not traverse the desert's deadly interior. Instead, they followed two main routes, northern and southern, that skirted the Taklamakan's perimeter, passing through oasis settlements sustained by underground water channels called qanats. These ancient engineering marvels, possibly introduced from Persia around the 1st century, consisted of underground tunnels that transported glacial meltwater from mountain bases to lowland agricultural areas entirely by gravity. Wells spaced along the tunnels allowed communities to draw cool, naturally filtered water without the devastating evaporation losses that would have doomed surface channels. At the peak of the qanat system's development in the 18th century, one region alone contained more than 5,000 kilometers of these subterranean waterways. The routes converged and divided repeatedly. From the Taklamakan's edges, merchants could choose to head south across the Pamir Mountains, known in Persian as Bami Dunya, or Roof of the World, traversing passes at altitudes exceeding 2,000 meters, sometimes crossing snowbound routes, even at higher elevations. These mountains, forming the border regions between what are now Tajikistan, Afghanistan, Kyrgyzstan, and China, presented their own formidable challenges, but they connected the Silk Road to pathways leading into northern India. Alternatively, caravans could continue westward through the Hindu Kush, descending eventually to Merv in Turkmenistan. where northern and southern routes rejoined. From Merv, the path continued in an almost straight line west through mountainous northern Iran and Mesopotamia, skirting the northern edge of the Syrian desert to reach the Levant. There, goods were loaded onto Mediterranean trading ships bound for ports in southern Europe, or they continued overland either north through Anatolia or south toward North Africa. A branching route also led from Afghanistan's ancient city of Herat to the Persian Gulf port of Charax-Spasinu, passing through Susa, from which ships carried goods to various Mediterranean destinations. Few individuals ever traveled the entire length of the Silk Road. Instead, goods changed hands many times in a system often called relay trade, passing through numerous intermediaries in the great trading cities and smaller caravanserais that dotted the landscape. This staggered progression meant that a bolt of silk leaving a workshop in eastern China might be sold and resold a dozen times before reaching a wealthy patron in Rome, with each transaction adding layers of value, story, and cultural transformation. The opening of the Silk Road is traditionally traced to the Han Dynasty's expansion into Central Asia around 114 BCE. Emperor Wu of Han, facing constant threats from the nomadic Xiongnu Confederation, dispatched an envoy named Zhang Qian in 138 BCE on a diplomatic mission to forge alliances against these formidable adversaries. Zhang Qian's journey, which included 13 years of capture and detention before his eventual escape, provided invaluable intelligence about the Western regions, their geography, peoples, and potential for trade. His second mission in 119 BCE successfully established the first diplomatic ties with kingdoms such as Wusun through exchanges of gold and silk. The Han Dynasty's military subsequently advanced into the Hexi Corridor and the Tarim Basin, defeating Xiongnu forces and establishing the security infrastructure necessary for trade to flourish. Military bases, garrisons, and fortified towns were built along the routes, and the Great Wall was extended to protect these vital arteries of commerce. By the 1st century of the Common Era, Chinese silk had become highly prized as far west as Rome, transforming the nascent trade routes into one of the Han Dynasty's greatest foreign policy achievements. Yet the routes were not new creations. Archaeological evidence suggests that trade networks connecting Asia with distant regions existed long before Zhang Qian's missions. The Sapali culture, an advanced Bronze Age civilization, thrived in areas around what would become Bukhara from around 3000 BCE. By the time the Silk Road formalized, settlements like Samarkand, then called Afrosiab, had existed since approximately the 7th century BCE, having already been conquered by Alexander the Great in 329 BCE and subsequently inhabited by the Sogdians, an Iranian people renowned for their trading skills. After the fall of the Han Dynasty in 220 CE, control over the routes fragmented among various regional powers, including the Sassanid Empire in Western Asia. Trade continued, but with less centralized coordination. It was not until the rise of the Tang Dynasty, which ruled from 618 to 907 CE, that the Silk Road experienced its golden age of revival. The Tang Dynasty's military strength secured the Tarim Basin from Eastern and Western Turks, and around 640 CE, the dynasty established the Protectorate General to pacify the West, followed by the Protectorate General of Beijing in 702 CE to oversee the northern routes. The Tang era brought unprecedented stability and a vibrant cosmopolitan culture to the Silk Road cities. The dynasty reduced taxes on merchants and consolidated control over key oasis kingdoms such as Kucha, Khotan, and Kashgar. This stability particularly favored the Sogdian merchants, Eastern Iranian-speaking intermediaries who transported goods between interconnected regions while serving as translators and cultural mediators. Dunhuang, located at the point where the northern and southern routes around the Taklamakan converged, became the main hub of Silk Road commerce during this period, as well as a major religious center. Construction of the Mogao caves near Dunhuang had begun in the 4th century CE when a Buddhist monk named Lazun experienced a vision of 1,000 Buddhas bathed in golden light. Over the following millennium, from the period of the Northern Liang dynasty through the Yuan dynasty, these caves grew into one of the world's most significant repositories of Buddhist art, with 492 preserved caves housing approximately 45,000 square meters of murals and more than 2,000 painted sculptures. The caves bore exceptional witness to cultural exchanges between China, Central Asia, and India, serving as a relay station where not only merchandise, but ideas were traded. The physical infrastructure supporting Silk Road trade was extensive and sophisticated. Caravanserais, large guest houses designed specifically to welcome traveling merchants and their caravans, dotted the routes at regular intervals. These establishments were ideally positioned within a day's journey of each other, typically every 30 to 40 kilometers, in well-maintained areas such as the Great Trunk Road running through northern India into Pakistan. This spacing prevented merchants and their precious cargoes from spending nights exposed to the dangers of the road. Caravanserais served multiple critical functions beyond mere lodging. They provided sleeping quarters for merchants and servants, stabling for horses, camels, mules, and donkeys, and storage for fodder and provisions. Within their walls, merchants could sell or buy goods in bulk, obtain information about trade news and prices in distant cities, and meet other merchant travelers, exchanging not only commercial information, but also cultures, languages, and ideas. The internal structure of these establishments facilitated interaction through the provision of hammams, public baths, and bazaars, creating further opportunities and incentives for travelers to connect with one another. Many caravanserais were furnished with mosques as Islam spread through Central Asia in the early Middle Ages, though Buddhism, Christianity, and Judaism were also transmitted by religious scholars traveling these routes. The traces of such exchange are reflected in the diverse yet closely interrelated cultures that emerged along the Silk Road and the plurality of languages and religions that flourished throughout this vast region. Cities containing caravanserais became great intellectual and cultural centers. Samarkand, Qazvin, Bukhara, Aleppo, and Acre, while those situated along isolated highways became local centers of civilization in otherwise remote areas. In larger caravanserais with 2 entrance gates, bazaars would run through the entire center of the compound. These internal markets were supplied by the newly arrived merchants and often fed into regional markets when the caravanserai was situated near cities. Such points of practical and commercial trade consolidated the more intangible yet profound exchanges that characterized these oases of hospitality. The debate over whether caravanserais should be located inside or outside city walls reflected competing interests. Merchants preferred locations outside the walls for ease of arrival and departure, allowing them to leave at dawn without waiting for gates to open. City authorities, however, preferred central locations within the walls, where they could more easily collect taxes and customs duties before caravans had an opportunity to depart early the next morning. This tension between facilitating trade and controlling it shaped the urban geography of Silk Road cities. Samarkand exemplifies how Silk Road commerce shaped urban development. By the time of the Persian Achaemenid Empire, this settlement had become the capital of the Sogdian satrapy. When Alexander the Great's conquests introduced classical Greek culture into Central Asia, Greek aesthetics heavily influenced local artisans, creating a Hellenistic legacy that continued as the city became part of successor states, including the Greek Seleucid Empire, the Greco-Bactrian Kingdom, and the Kushan Empire. Though Samarkand declined as a center of power during the 3rd century CE, it revived significantly by the 5th century. In the early Middle Ages, Samarkand was surrounded by 4 rows of defensive walls and had 4 gates. The Sayab and Dargam canals, supplying the city and its suburbs with water, had been constructed around the 7th to 5th centuries BCE. After the arrival of Arab influence in the late 7th century, Samarkand developed into a center of Islamic and Arabic learning. By the end of the 740s, when an uprising led to the Abbasid commander Abu Muslim becoming governor of Khorasan and Mavarannahr, he chose Samarkand as his residence, associating his name with the construction of a multi-kilometer defensive wall around the city and a palace. The Mongol conquest in 1220 brought devastation. Genghis Khan killed all who took refuge in the citadel and mosque, pillaged the city completely, and conscripted 30,000 young men, along with 30,000 craftsmen. Yet Samarkand's location and strategic importance ensured its eventual recovery. When Timur, known in the West as Tamerlane, made Samarkand the capital of his empire in the late 14th century, he initiated an ambitious rebuilding program that would define the city's golden age. Timur had a vision of creating a new type of capital that projected political power through art and architecture, outshining cities like Isfahan and Baghdad. Bringing architects and craftsmen from throughout his empire, he fostered a fusion of Turkic, Mongol, and Persian architectural styles that gave birth to what became known as Timurid architecture, characterized by enormous domes, intricate tile mosaics, and precise geometric order. The city was in a state of constant construction, with Timur often ordering buildings to be done and redone quickly if results displeased him. By his orders, Samarkand could be reached only by roads, with deep ditches dug and walls 8 kilometers in circumference, separating the city from its surrounding neighbors. The city's population at this time reached approximately 150,000. One crown jewel of this period was the Bibi Kanyim Mosque, a massive, axially oriented religious structure featuring a gigantic entry iwan, turquoise-glazed domes, and calligraphic inscriptions. It demonstrated how monumentality could coexist with precise detailing and mathematics, constructed both to please residents and to impress visiting dignitaries. Though ruthless on the battlefield, Timur demonstrated mercy toward those with special artistic abilities, sparing the lives of artists, craftsmen, and architects so they could improve and beautify his capital. Timur's grandson, Ulugh Beg, who ruled in the early 15th century, transformed Samarkand into a scientific hub. Less a ruler than a scientist and poet, Ulugh Beg was a competent soldier but dedicated his life to science and education. Between 1417 and 1420, he built a madrasa, an educational institution, in Samarkand that became the first building in the architectural ensemble of the Registan, the city's great ceremonial square. inviting a large number of astronomers and mathematicians from throughout the Islamic world to this madrasa. Ulugh Beg positioned Samarkand as one of the world centers of medieval science and the intellectual capital of early 15th century Central Asia. The Registan itself, whose name means sandy place in Persian, became an essential example of how culture and urban planning could be integrated into a single public space. Surrounded by three imposing madrasas built at different periods, Ulugh Beg, 1417-1420, Shirdor, 1619-1636, and Tilyakori, 1646-1660, the square served as a civic and intellectual hub. These institutions included not only religious instruction but also lecture halls, libraries, and dormitories providing secular education in subjects like algebra and astronomy. The Registan's spatial choreography, with its symmetrical facades, lavishly tiled surfaces, and natural pedestrian movement, exemplified classical public space design principles. Ulugh Beg also established a famous observatory in Samarkand, housing an enormous sextant partially buried underground that enabled exceptionally precise astronomical calculations. This structure was a unique example of scientific architecture in the Islamic world, with logical, minimalistic, function-driven design. It demonstrated how civic aspirations and intellectual depth could be expressed through purpose-built architecture. Transforming Samarkand into more than a commercial center, it became a beacon of knowledge. Bukhara, another jewel of the Silk Road, developed its own distinct character. Since 3000 BCE, the Sapali culture had thrived at sites in this region, and by 1500 BCE, a combination of factors including climatic drying, iron technology, and the arrival of Aryan nomads triggered a population shift to the oasis from outlying areas. Like Samarkand, Bukhara's urban development involved the transformation of pre-Islamic settlement cores into fortified citadels, with walled towns built around them, and trade and craft districts of shops and workshops extending beyond the walls. When the Shaybanid dynasty established their capital in Bukhara in the 16th century, it marked a shift in regional power that correspondingly reduced Samarkand's role in prosperity. Yet both cities retained their significance as cultural and religious centers, their skylines defined by towering domes and sparkling minarets. The Labai House in Bukhara, featuring a 16th century Kukuldash madrasa and a pond, one of the few remaining houses that survived Soviet rule, remained a focal point of urban life. These water features were not merely decorative. They were essential to life in an arid region where sophisticated water management could mean the difference between flourishing and perishing. The caravans themselves were remarkable feats of organization and endurance. Caravan trade on the Silk Road was connected not only with high profits, but also with enormous risks, which is why merchants sought companions to form large caravans consisting of hundreds and even thousands of armed people. Some caravans consisted of dozens of pack animals, while particularly large ones might include several thousand camels. The largest recorded caravans were those for special purposes, such as the Muslim pilgrim caravans from Cairo and Damascus to Mecca, which might include over 10,000 camels, or trans-Saharan salt caravans, which even in their decline in 1908 numbered 20,000 camels. The animal that made these desert crossings possible was the Bactrian camel, a two-humped species native to the steppes of Central Asia. These remarkable creatures stood 1.5 to 2.4 meters high to the top of their humps when those humps were full and erect, and they could weigh more than 700 kilograms. Unlike their single-humped dromedary cousins adapted for hot plains, Bactrian camels were mountain animals capable of crossing passes at elevations exceeding 2,000 meters, even when covered in snow. Their calloused feet could handle ice, rocks, and snow, and they possessed a long, woolly outer coat that varied from brown to beige, reaching lengths of nearly a foot in winter. The two humps of the Bactrian camel, standing about 25 to 35 centimeters high when full, served not to store water as commonly assumed, but to store energy in the form of fat. Each hump contained approximately 25 to 35 kilograms of fat, equivalent to a calorie reserve of 250,000 to 350,000 kilocalories. The appearance of these humps, whether firm and full or flaccid, served as an indicator of the animal's nutritional state. When a camel didn't receive adequate food, the humps would shrink, lose their fat, go flaccid, and droop to one side. The breakdown of fat always began in the rear hump. Camels were known as the ships of the desert, and with good reason. They could carry loads of approximately 350 pounds in hot weather on long journeys, though on shorter journeys, in cooler weather, or when merchants sought to evade customs duties, the load might be increased to 1,000 pounds. Passengers were carried in panniers slung one on each side of the camel. The Quran itself acknowledged their importance, reading, "On them, as well as in ships, ye ride." A typical caravan needed at least 2 camels per person, one to carry the person and one to carry supplies, in addition to whatever camels were needed to transport trade goods. Camels carried blankets, salt, millet, bales of hay, and more valuable trading goods loaded onto cargo racks tied around blankets on the camel's back. In the desert and on caravans, camels were usually tethered head to tail in a line to maintain order. Otherwise, they tended to become disorderly and head in any direction they chose. Ropes passed through the nose ring and tied to the saddle of the camel in front were used to fasten camels together in strings of up to 40 animals. 3 or 4 strings might travel abreast, or the whole caravan might travel in one long line. Caravans moved at the pace of a walking human being, typically 2 or 3 miles per hour for 9 hours daily, from dawn until mid-afternoon. Moving at this rate, a caravan could cover 1,000 miles in 5 to 8 weeks. Though the going was slow, great effort was made to keep a caravan moving continuously, as stopping it required enormous effort to get it going again. On sand dunes, camels would sink hock-deep in loose, powdery sand, but struggle onward, snaking around, up and over the dunes, grunting when the uphill going became difficult, and surging forward on downhill slopes. The daily rhythm of caravan life was shaped by the extreme conditions of the terrain. In the hottest months, caravans typically set off at dawn to the call of horns and kettle drums, then rested in the shade of tents during the middle of the day when the sun was most punishing, moving on again in late afternoon, and continuing until well after dark. This pattern minimized exposure to the most dangerous heat while maximizing the hours of usable travel time. The temperature differences between day and night could exceed 40 degrees Celsius in the Taklamakan Desert, where summer surface temperatures might reach 67 to 70 degrees Celsius, while winter minimums dropped below -20 degrees. During spring, when the surface sand became warm and ascending currents developed, northeasterly winds became particularly strong, creating frequent and intense sandstorms. 1/3 of the year in the Taklamakan could be classified as sandstorm days, with hurricane-force dust storms sometimes filling the atmosphere with sand and dust to heights of nearly 4,000 meters above sea level. Traveling during these conditions required face coverings to protect against the abrasive sand, and visibility could drop to almost nothing as the horizon disappeared behind curtains of wind-driven particles. Along caravan routes where vegetation was scarce or absent, camels were fed grass carried by the caravan, grass that the caravanners sometimes slept on at night. Calculating how much grass to carry was critically important. Too much unnecessarily burdened the camels, while too little left them hungry and weakened. Although camels could survive long periods without drinking, if they worked hard, they needed regular food to maintain their strength. When their stomachs were empty, their breath gave off a horrible smell. Camel ticks would bite and crawl on the caravanners, adding to the discomforts of the journey. The Bactrian camel's ability to drink salt water and its fondness for salt lakes and grazing land with high salt content gave it an advantage in the harsh desert environments where brackish water and halophytes were often the only resources available. This dietary requirement likely developed during the animal's evolutionary adaptation to the desert steppes. Domesticated camels had served as beasts of burden in Inner Asia since ancient times, and their resistance to cold, drought, and high altitude made caravan travel along the Silk Road possible. Yet nothing could fully protect merchants from the arbitrary rules of local governors or attacks by nomad tribes. Therefore, merchants seldom passed the Silk Road from one end to the other, instead exchanging goods in intermediate trade cities. This relay system, while lengthening the chain of commerce, also provided opportunities for countless communities along the routes to participate in and profit from the flow of goods. Special merchants or entire companies undertook the specialized work of goods transportation organization. A considerable role in trade development was played by nomadic cattlemen who accompanied caravans, provided their animals for food and transportation, and specialized across generations in the intricate knowledge of caravan trade. Along the way, service stations emerged where locals made their living catering to travelers' needs. Merchants carrying costly porcelain knew they could get any breakages mended in Tashkent, the specialist center for China repairs, thus arriving with their goods at least seemingly intact. Such specialization created economic niches that sustained communities far from major urban centers. The variety of goods traded along the Silk Road was astonishing in its breadth and richness. Though silk gave the routes their name and remained the most prestigious commodity, its production technique a closely guarded Chinese secret for millennia. Many other goods flowed in both directions across Eurasia. From China came not only silk, but also porcelain, tea, paper, ornate bronze mirrors, lacquerware, and medicines. Chinese paper, one of the most remarkable inventions of Chinese technical genius, became highly appreciated throughout the regions it reached. Central Asia exported camels that were greatly valued in China, along with military equipment, gold and silver, semi-precious stones, and glass items. Samarkand-made glass was especially valued for its high quality and was considered a luxury good. The region also provided skins, wool, cotton fabrics, gold embroidery, exotic fruits, including watermelons, melons, and peaches, fat-tailed sheep, and hunting animals such as dogs, leopards, and lions. India was famous for its fabrics, spices, semi-precious stones, dyes, and ivory. Precious stones and gems including lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, jade from China, turquoise from Persia, and rubies from Burma sparkled throughout the trade network, prized as symbols of wealth and spiritual power. The trade in these gems encouraged artistic innovation as craftsmen in cities like Samarkand and Kashgar developed unique jewelry traditions that merged imported stones with regional designs. Spices formed another crucial category of trade goods, with Arabs dominating much of the spices and perfumes trade. Although India and East Africa were producing areas, Arab traders largely monopolized transshipment, and by the 10th century, trade in Europe was almost entirely controlled by Arab merchants. Frankincense and myrrh from southern Arabia and Somalia were among the most valuable aromatics, known in China as poosu, Persian goods, showing how Persia became the fulcrum of the spice routes. These resins were valued not only for their fragrance, but also for medicinal properties and religious significance. From the northern regions came pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg, traveling westward from India and Southeast Asia, bringing exotic flavors that influenced local food cultures across numerous regions. Sandalwood from India, ambergris from the Mediterranean, camphor from China, and saffron from Iran all found their way into the cosmopolitan mixture of goods available in Silk Road markets. From the Arabian Peninsula, frankincense, produced by Boswellia sacra trees and other Boswellia species, was transported in carefully organized caravans. The resin, harvested by making incisions in the tree bark and allowing the sap to dry, was burned as incense in religious ceremonies and used in perfumes. Rome and later Christian kingdoms sent wools, gold, silver, and European goods eastward. Eastern Europe exported considerable volumes of skins, furs, fur animals, bark for skin processing, cattle, and slaves to Central Asian markets. Northern Europe contributed furs, skins, honey, and slaves to the trading networks. Woolen products from Central Asia and the Eastern Mediterranean, including woolen clothes, carpets, curtains, blankets, and rugs, impressed the Chinese, who were unfamiliar with wool processing, carpet manufacture, and weaving techniques. Parthian tapestries and carpets became highly appreciated in the ancient empires. The physical spaces where this commerce occurred, the bazaars, became legendary centers of cultural exchange and economic activity. Bazaars along the Silk Road served as colorful, exotic testimonies to a culture that spanned nearly 2,000 years. These markets were not merely places of transaction, but social institutions where information flowed as freely as goods, where travelers from distant lands could meet and exchange news, and where the flavors, textures, and aromas of an interconnected world came together in dense, vibrant concentrations. The bazaars themselves exhibited remarkable architectural and organizational sophistication. The Grand Bazaar in Istanbul evolved from the first Bedestan or covered market created around 1461 during the Ottoman period, still covers 100 acres with some 18 gates and 4,000 shops. Its jewelry section traditionally remained at the center, the best protected area of the bazaar, a placement that continues to this day. Though badly damaged in an earthquake in 1894 and facing serious decay by the 1950s, restoration efforts ensured its survival as a living monument to Silk Road commerce. Language barriers presented constant challenges in these polyglot markets. Only very rarely did traders travel from end to end of the Silk Road, so merchants meeting in bazaars typically came from just a few countries away. To facilitate communication, merchants developed the practice of first stating what the subject of conversation would be. My words are going to be about woven silk, camels, porcelain bowls, bandits up ahead, or whatever vital topic needed discussion. This practical solution to linguistic diversity allowed essential information to flow, despite the absence of common languages. Bargaining customs varied fascinatingly across different Silk Road regions. In Yemen, traders developed a practice of using hand gestures under a cloth held over the hands of buyer and seller, so no one else could see the deal being made. Fingers symbolized numbers, while yes or no responses were signaled with the eyes. Perhaps this, too, related to the need to overcome language barriers, that ancient challenge of cross-cultural commerce. In the Levant, it was common for stallholders to state too high a price, then walk off in apparent disgust when the buyer refused, a theatrical performance that was understood by both parties as part of the negotiation ritual. Ceramics had been part of Silk Road trading for about 1,000 years, with Chinese porcelain representing a valuable commodity transported with great care westward. This white gold was widely admired for its strength and artistic beauty, capturing the admiration of Middle Eastern and European households and becoming a symbol of refinement. The demand for porcelain inspired new pottery techniques in Persia and later attempts at replication in Europe, demonstrating how Silk Road trade witnessed not merely the exchange of finished goods, but also the transmission of technology and artistry across civilizations. The trade routes facilitated the movement of cotton cultivation, which originated in India and spread via the Silk Road to many other regions. By the medieval period, cotton fabrics and vibrant textiles reached Central Asia, the Middle East, and Europe, with colorful patterns and intricate weaves becoming highly sought goods in the bazaars of Bukhara and Samarkand. These textiles influenced local clothing styles and interior decoration across vast distances. While merchants formed the commercial backbone of the Silk Road, religious pilgrims and missionaries constituted another crucial category of travelers whose journeys profoundly shaped the cultural landscape of the routes. Although many factors contributed to the spread of Buddhism across Central Asia and China, Silk Road travelers played a vital part, mostly including Buddhist monks, missionaries, and the traveling merchants they converted. Missionary activity began in the 3rd century BCE, when King Ashoka sent Indian missionaries into Central Asia via the Silk Roads. Around the 1st century BCE, Buddhists began the practice of writing down and translating scriptures into different languages, enabling the faith to spread more systematically. Buddhism entered China via the Silk Road, with Buddhist monks traveling with merchant caravans to preach their new religion. The lucrative Chinese silk trade along these routes had begun during the Han Dynasty, with voyages by people like Zhang Qian establishing ties between China and the West. Extensive contacts accelerated in the 2nd century CE, probably as a consequence of the expansion of the Greco-Buddhist Kushan Empire into the Chinese territory of the Tarim Basin, accompanied by the missionary efforts of numerous Central Asian Buddhist monks to Chinese lands. The first missionaries and translators of Buddhist scriptures into Chinese were either Parthian, Kushan, Sogdian, or Kuchean. These early transmitters of Buddhism brought not only religious texts, but also artistic traditions, architectural styles, and philosophical concepts that would profoundly influence Chinese culture. From the 4th century onward, Chinese pilgrims undertook increasingly ambitious journeys to India, seeking improved access to original scriptures. Faxian, one of the earliest and most significant pilgrims, journeyed along the Silk Road from 395 to 414 CE in search of Buddhist scriptures. His travels, extensively documented in A Record of Buddhistic Kingdoms, offer valuable insights into the cultures and religious practices of the Indian subcontinent during the 4th and 5th centuries. His narrative of voyages on mercantile vessels, marked by near catastrophic experiences due to the ravages of the sea, demonstrates the relationship between Buddhist monks and itinerant traders, as well as the existence of maritime trading channels linking the coastal regions of India and China. Xuanzang, perhaps the most famous Chinese pilgrim, spent 17 years traveling across Central Asia and India in the 7th century, seeking Buddhist scriptures. His journey, recorded in Records of the Western Regions, offers insights into the era's political, cultural, and religious landscape. Bringing back numerous texts, he pioneered a new translation period that profoundly shaped Chinese Buddhism. His travels were not without danger. He met a band of robbers near Karachi and in Afghanistan, and was nearly burned at the stake by pirates not far from Ayodhya. His caravan consisted of 5 priests, 20 followers, 1 elephant, 10 asses, and 4 horses when they crossed the Hindu Kush Mountains, a passage that proved far more difficult than they had imagined. Christianity, Islam, and Judaism were also transmitted by religious scholars traveling the routes. The Silk Road served as a means to exchange not only goods, but also share innovations, playing a role in the development of science, technology, literature, and the arts. Countless trade caravans, military units, missionaries, and religious pilgrims made the Pamir section of the Silk Road known as the Road of Ideologies. When night fell across the desert expanses of the Silk Road, an entirely different world emerged. Away from any source of artificial light, the darkness became profound, and the stars appeared with breathtaking clarity. The Milky Way would form a clear, sweeping arc across the sky, with constellations jumping off the twinkling canvas with a brilliance rarely witnessed in more populated regions. This celestial display was not merely beautiful, it served practical purposes for navigation, as these same stars had guided Silk Road caravans through mountain passes and across featureless desert expanses for centuries. Travelers spending nights in the desert experienced a quiet unlike any in settled regions. The stillness was interrupted only by the crunch of sand underfoot, the occasional grunt of a resting camel, or the faint chirp of crickets hidden among sparse desert vegetation. As twilight faded and darkness settled completely, temperatures would drop dramatically. That 40-degree difference between day and night becoming palpable as the scorching heat dissipated into the clear, dry air. Travelers would wrap themselves in blankets and gather around campfires, their breaths vaporizing into the cold evening air. In these moments around the fire, stories were exchanged. Bedouin songs might be taught, traditional desert drums played, and tales told of distant cities, treacherous mountain passes, profitable trades, and narrow escapes from bandits or sandstorms. These were not merely entertainments, but essential information exchanges, warnings about road conditions ahead, news of political changes affecting trade routes, reports of water sources or the lack thereof. The oral transmission of knowledge was as vital to Silk Road commerce as the physical movement of goods. Desert camping had its own rituals and rhythms. Tents would be erected in protected spots when possible, positioned to provide shelter from the prevailing winds. After dinner, perhaps featuring traditional foods of the region, bread baked in sand-heated stones, dried fruits and nuts carried from distant markets, tea brewed over carefully maintained fires. Travelers might experience sand skiing down dunes or climb to the top of nearby elevations to watch the sunset paint the landscape in shades of amber, crimson, and deep purple. As full darkness descended, campfire parties might begin around 22:30 in the evening, with people from various regions gathering around the bonfire to dance and sing. Organized interactive programs livening the gathering. These celebrations typically lasted about 90 minutes, after which exhausted travelers would retire to their tents, or, if they preferred, lie outside to enjoy the spectacular canopy of stars overhead. The experience of lying on one's back beneath the Milky Way, listening to the profound silence of the desert, interrupted only by the distant call of a night bird or the whisper of wind across sand, connected travelers across millennia. This same sky had watched over countless caravans, witnessed the rise and fall of empires, and illuminated the paths of merchants, pilgrims, soldiers, and scholars for more than 1,500 years. In such moments, the weight of that history became tangible, the sense that one was participating in something far larger and longer lasting than any individual life. The architectural legacy of the Silk Road reflects centuries of cultural exchange and adaptation to challenging environments. Urban development along the routes typically involved the transformation of pre-Islamic settlement cores into fortified citadels, with walled towns built around them and trade and craft districts extending beyond the defensive perimeters. From around the 10th century, as influences from the Arabian Peninsula and China merged with pre-existing Central Asian traditions, various elements of architectural design were incorporated into existing patterns. These cultural interactions became apparent in the construction of monumental and decorative structures, religious buildings, bathhouses, caravanserais, palaces, as well as in carving and ornamental design. Generally, the pattern of urban development created a fortified citadel at the core, with a walled town surrounding it, and outside this walled area, a trade and craft district comprised of shops and workshops. This tripartite structure balanced defensive needs with commercial accessibility, allowing cities to protect their populations while facilitating the trade that sustained them. The transmission and interaction of different cultures contributed to the shaping of architectural design along the Silk Road. Some innovations arose from advances in mathematics, and particularly applied geometry developed in multicultural centers of learning. The intricate geometric patterns adorning madrasas, mosques, and caravanserais reflected sophisticated mathematical understanding, with tile work creating complex tessellations that seemed to extend infinitely. Other architectural features were specific to the necessities of long-distance trade and travel, such as the distinctive design of caravanserais with their central courtyards, surrounding arcades for animal stabling, and upper-level rooms for human lodging. The culture of cities like Palmyra was influenced by Greco-Roman traditions, producing distinctive art and architecture that combined Eastern and Western elements. The flow of trade through such cities supported building on a grand scale, with temples, civic buildings, and elegant public spaces making them among the most luxurious settlements in their regions. This architectural cosmopolitanism, the blending of diverse aesthetic traditions into new synthetic forms, became a defining characteristic of Silk Road urbanism. The Silk Road's importance fluctuated across centuries as political circumstances and competing trade routes altered the flow of commerce. The Aleutian Rebellion, spanning from 755 to 763 CE, severely weakened the Tang dynasty's control over the routes, as troops were withdrawn from frontier regions. This interruption resulted in the Tang dynasty losing significant territories to the Tibetans, and the routes became fragmented. The dynasty officially ended in 907 CE, marking the close of the Silk Road's golden age. During the Yuan dynasty under Mongol rule from 1271 to 1368, trade was revived and reached new heights. The Mongols, who ruled a vast empire stretching across Eurasia, promoted trade throughout their domains and safeguarded a northern Silk Road land route that crossed the Eurasian steppes. Genghis Khan's unification of small states and construction of a great empire under his rule created unprecedented security for long-distance commerce. Marco Polo, the Venetian merchant, traveled along the Silk Road, visiting the Yuan capital Dadu, now Beijing, during this period. In his famous book on the Orient, he mentions a special board-shaped passport issued by the Yuan government to merchants to protect their trade and free movement within the country. Yet by this time, changes were already underway that would ultimately diminish the land route's importance. Islam had conquered much of Central Asia, and the Silk Road declined in significance as trading via sea routes began to dominate Chinese trade with the outside world. Maritime routes offered advantages in speed and cargo capacity. A large merchant sailing ship could carry as much as 6,000 camels, making sea travel far more efficient for bulk goods over long distances. During the Ming Dynasty, the Silk Road was finally officially abandoned, and Dunhuang slowly became depopulated and largely forgotten by the outside world. Most of the Mogao caves were abandoned, though the site remained a place of pilgrimage and was used for worship by local people. The grand caravanserais fell into disrepair, the elaborate irrigation systems were neglected, and the vibrant bazaars that had hummed with polyglot commerce fell silent. Yet, the legacy endured in countless ways, in the artistic traditions that had been transmitted, in the crops and technologies that had spread, in the architectural styles that had merged and evolved, in the religious and philosophical ideas that had found new homes in distant lands. The very diversity of cultures that had emerged along the Silk Road, the plurality of languages and religions that flourished throughout the region, bore witness to more than a millennium of exchange. As we rest here in the stillness of this moment, we can let our thoughts drift across those vast distances, from the workshops of eastern China, where silk was woven on wooden looms, to the bazaars of Samarkand, where that silk was sold and resold, to the courts of Rome, where it draped the shoulders of emperors and senators. We can imagine the Bactrian camels, their two humps full and firm at the journey's beginning, plodding steadily across windswept plains at 2 miles per hour, hour after hour, day after day, covering those 1,000-mile distances in spans of 5 to 8 weeks. We can picture the caravanserais spaced every 30 to 40 kilometers along well-maintained routes, their courtyards providing refuge from the dangers of the road, their hammams offering respite from the dust and heat, their internal bazaars buzzing with commerce and cultural exchange. We can envision the merchants sleeping on bales of grass carried for their camels, waking before dawn to the call of horns and kettle drums, moving through the coolness of early morning before the desert sun reached its punishing zenith. We can contemplate the underground qanats, those marvels of ancient engineering that brought glacial meltwater from mountain bases to oasis settlements entirely through gravity, their cool, naturally filtered water sustaining communities that would otherwise have perished in the arid climate. We can reflect on the Mogao caves near Dunhuang, where 45,000 square meters of murals and more than 2,000 painted sculptures bore witness to 1,000 years of artistic achievement and spiritual devotion. The Silk Road was never merely about economics. Though the profits from trade were substantial, it was about connection, the fundamental human impulse to reach beyond familiar horizons, to exchange not only goods, but ideas, to learn from those who lived differently, believed differently, created differently. It was about the patient accumulation of knowledge across generations, the slow building of trust between distant communities, the gradual weaving of a web of relationships that spanned half the world. The roots may have been officially abandoned centuries ago, but their influence persists in ways both obvious and subtle. The tomatoes that originated in the Americas but became essential to Italian cuisine traveled westward along descendants of these ancient pathways. The spices that define Indian cooking often journeyed through Central Asian markets. The carpets that warm Central Asian homes reflect patterns that evolved through centuries of cultural exchange. The astronomical observations made at Ulugh Beg's observatory in Samarkand contributed to the cumulative body of scientific knowledge that eventually enabled modern space exploration. Some historians believe that the greatest legacy of the Silk Road lies not in any specific good or idea that was transmitted, but in the very concept it proved viable, that diverse peoples could cooperate across vast distances, that mutual benefit could be found in exchange. That difference could be a source of enrichment rather than only conflict. The traces of this ancient network remain visible for those who know where to look. In the architectural ensembles of Samarkand and Bukhara, in the linguistic diversity of Central Asia, in the religious pluralism that characterizes many Silk Road regions even today. Tonight, as we settle into rest, we might carry with us an image of those desert nights, the profound darkness punctuated by stars too numerous to count, the silence broken only by the soft sounds of resting camels and dying campfires, the cold, clear air carrying scents of tea and wood smoke. We might imagine ourselves lying on our backs on the sand, wrapped in blankets against the nighttime chill, watching the Milky Way arc across the sky as it had for every traveler who had passed this way across 15 centuries. The Silk Road teaches us that distance, though formidable, is not insurmountable, that harsh conditions, though challenging, can be endured, that differences in language, belief, and custom, though initially barriers, can become bridges when approached with openness and patience, that the slow, steady pace of the camel caravan, 2 miles per hour, day after day, can eventually span continents and connect civilizations. As sleep approaches, we can rest in the knowledge that the same stars that guided those ancient travelers across desert and mountain still shine overhead, that the winds that once filled the sails of merchant ships still blow, that the human capacity for curiosity and commerce and cultural exchange endures across all the changes of history. The routes may shift, the vehicles may change from camel to truck to airplane, but the fundamental impulse to reach beyond ourselves, to connect, to exchange, to learn, remains as constant as those desert stars. In the stillness of this night, we are connected to all those who journeyed before, all those who will journey after, all those who understand that the true treasures of the Silk Road were not the silk or spices or precious stones, valuable though those were, but the encounters themselves, the moments when strangers became trading partners, when foreign ideas sparked new understandings, when distant cultures touched and enriched each other in ways that neither could have achieved alone. Let that understanding settle gently over us now, like sand softly accumulating in the desert night, grain by grain, century by century, building something that endures